Hi everyone. So this video is going to focus on some of the more technical, process-oriented parts of this project. So I went ahead and selected my image. This is a picture of some friends of mine who are really important parts of my chosen family, sort of marching across this landscape. And I chose this image because I thought it was striking and because I liked that it had kind of an open-ended narrative to it. So you could kind of imagine a lot of different scenarios that these people might be in, while at the same time it's personally meaningful. So to get this image ready to transfer over to my plate, I first took it in to an editing software in my computer. So this might look different for you depending on what kind of computer or phone you're using, but basically I just went into the image preferences and then I clicked on Adjust Color. I then slid the saturation all the way down so that it became a black and white image, and I boosted the contrast a bit. But then I took this image and I traced it from my computer screen. You can also, if you have a printer, you can print it out and then trace it using a window, which you can use as a light box. It's also good practice to just translate it using your drawing skills. So I plan on making this print only one layer. If you would like to incorporate multiple layers of color, I'll include a link to an additional video in which you can see that process. So while I have many values of grayscale in this image, because of the printmaking process and because I'm using only one layer of color, I'm going to need to think about how to translate each value through mark making. So I will be making my marks through actually carving away the negative space or the white space to leave the black parts there. So I've noticed that some sections, for instance the forest in the background, are going to be mostly black. So I don't want to carve away too much from that section. And I might first start by carving away all of the white parts of the sky and the white parts of the snow at the bottom of the image. But then I'm going to think about how I can use my carving tools to capture as much detail as possible through the directionality of my marks, maybe the size of my marks as well, and how I can create different patterns and textures to set each section of this landscape apart from one another. That will help to create depth and separate each plane from the others. So once I've translated my drawing into just one tone that is about the same size and format as my block itself, I can then start the transfer process. So you can do this using a chalk pastel or charcoal or any other soft material or even a soft lead pencil. But basically I'm going to show you how to make your own transfer paper. So here I have my drawing on the right and my block on the left. So they're just about the same size. And through my pencil drawing, I've just mapped out sort of the darkest section, the sections that will be my midtones, which are the areas of the rocks and the mountains behind. And I've also mapped out which sections will be left white and which sections will be details that I'll need to make sure to carve around. So the next thing I'm going to do is to transfer my drawing over by placing my drawing directly on top with a layer of transferable material on the back of my paper. So I'm going to flip over my drawing and I'm going to rub my charcoal all over the entire surface. So if you were to buy transfer paper in the store, basically it has a whole page on the back that is layered in graphite that you can then go through and trace onto your block or another surface. So you can do this with a chalk pastel, it does not matter what color it is. And I actually am out in a rural area where there was a forest fire recently, so I grabbed some charcoal that was made from a burnt tree. Next, I'll flip over my handmade transfer paper right on top of my block. I then recommend taping the edges to ensure that it doesn't move around at all when you're tracing your image onto the block. Next, I'm going to take a pencil or a pen, and I'm basically just going to bear down over the marks that I've already made. So it's really important that you don't move your transfer paper around very much through this process, and that you're only bearing down on the sections that you want to transfer. Once my image is transferred, I'm going to go over the sections that I want to keep with a Sharpie or a permanent marker of some kind. You can also use a pen if you don't have a Sharpie. But I want to try to get a sense of what sort of mark making I want to make through my carving. Now I can start to carve. So I recommend using a sort of deep V tool and starting by just carving away any sections that you know are going to be pure white. So I've carved away this large section on the bottom, and I'm going to show you a technique using an X-Acto knife to get a cleaner edge. So I've carved around these really important sections, like the figures and this fallen tree, and I've done so by going around the edges with an X-Acto knife first. So here I'm demonstrating how I can get a nice, clean, fluid line by carving first with an X-Acto knife around the edges, and then I can go through with a bigger carving tool to get rid of more surface area at once. So if you ordered the easy cut stuff from the supply list, you shouldn't have a problem at all with the carving process. Some linoleum is much tougher. So here I'm using a really old piece of linoleum, so you might see me struggling more than you will. So once you've gone around some of the edges with your X-Acto knife, it's going to be easier for you to cut out large sections of the white without running into those edges that are really important to your drawing. And everyone is going to make a few mistakes along the way. I certainly carved away some of my important lines as I went, and that's just something that you will learn with practice. So no worries if that happens. But one thing that's really important to remember is that you always want to cut away from yourself and your hands, because it's true that this can be pretty dangerous if you're working in a way that's unsafe. You also want to keep in mind that through the process, you can pretty easily cut into the table or surface that you're working on. So you want to make sure that your workstation is in a place, so maybe it's on a porch that's already scratched up, maybe you're working outside, maybe you're working on like a plastic table that you're not super worried about. I'm working on a really scratched up table that I believe has been carved on before, but something to think about as you work. So now that I have this clean line around the edge, it becomes much easier for me to remove large sections. And so because I want this section at the very top and the very bottom to be pretty much pure white, I want to carve it pretty deep. This way, this white section will balance out the darker gradations that I'll have in most of the rest of the print. So the next thing that I've done is I've gone through with a smaller tool and carved out every single white space left on my linoleum. So instead of carving out the black lines, which might be more intuitive, you're going to carve out the negative space around the black lines so that they remain raised and will catch the ink during the printing process to transfer onto your paper. I didn't capture all of my carving on video, but since you last saw it, I've carved through each section of this landscape and switching through the directionality and the size of my marks based on which part of the landscape I'm trying to render. So now I'm ready to do a test print, and I always like to do this before I'm totally finished carving, just so I can see which sections are already working and which sections I might need to go through and carve a bit more out of. So here's what my test print looks like, and to me it seems like there's definitely some details that I'm missing in the figures, as well as sort of the separation between that section of rocks and the forest behind it. And I've lost a lot of my detail in the section of rocks, particularly the smaller rocks that were supposed to be going back into the distance, because I didn't carve them out deep enough. So since I've gone through And I've added those details that I thought that I needed from that test print. So I've added a few moments of detail in the figures, and I've gone through and I've made sure that my marks are getting smaller as they go back into the distance. So in preparing for the printing process, I want to have a piece of glass with tape around the edges for safety, some paper cut down to pretty close to the size and format of my block. I've got my water-based relief printing ink, my brayer, and something to bear down on. So you can use your hand or a wooden spoon. And then I'll squeeze some ink onto my piece of glass. I then will spread it out with a palette knife. You can use a regular knife or another tool if you don't have one. And this is going to ensure that I don't get too much ink at a time on my brayer, and I can get a nice even coating on my print. And when you roll the ink out with your brayer, it should make kind of a tacky sound. Your brayer should be coated with an even but relatively thin layer of ink before you go to roll it onto your block. You may need to add some additional ink throughout the process of inking up your block. This is a process of trial and error, so don't be discouraged if you get it wrong a few times, because I certainly did. But if you get too much ink on your plate, it will then seep into the cracks and you won't get as clear of an image. If you don't put enough ink onto your plate, your image won't be as strong and high contrast and will have a speckly look to it. If I haven't mentioned it already, your linoleum block is otherwise known as your printing plate. When you're doing the printing process, after you've gotten enough ink onto your plate, you want to print it right away because your ink will dry within a few minutes. You then want to rub the back of it with your hands or a wooden spoon. I always like to peel back a bit of my print before I know that it's totally done, just in case I need to keep rubbing the back of it. So now you can see me signing and labeling my print. So you guys are making editions of prints, which means basically a series using one block to create a certain number of limited edition prints. So for this project, you're required to make a 6-edition series of prints. So in the bottom right corner of your finished prints, you'll sign your name, and in the bottom left corner, you'll write the number out of 6 based on the order in which you made them, followed by the title and the year. This is to give you some practice in professionally labeling your printmaking work. This next section of the video is to show you an optional method of creating a gradient of multiple colors on your block. Here I've created a gray by mixing black and white, and I've added some blue. I've then rolled my brayer back and forth until it creates a blend in the middle. I've then rolled it right across onto my block, and even though my brayer is smaller than my block itself, I can roll my brayer on the bottom with some darker blue to give the illusion that it's a fade from dark blue up to light gray. I also want to encourage you guys to experiment a bit. So if you have a misprint like this one, try using it as an opportunity to try some experimental techniques and print in ways that might be breaking the rules of printmaking. So how can you create a new composition based on a mess up? Well, that's about it. I hope you guys are doing okay, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or would like any feedback along the way. I love talking to you guys about your work, so please don't hesitate to reach out. I hope you guys are staying safe and healthy out there, and I hope this project is enjoyable for you. If you're finding that it's not, please reach out and I can help you figure out a way to make it enjoyable. Have a good one. Bye-bye.